Hello, everyone. This is Gedalia Meyer with the Temple Institute Torah Parsha class. I am again doing this podcast from my home near Jerusalem due to the ongoing restrictions. It does look like those restrictions will gradually be eased over the coming weeks, news that is both tremendously relieving to those of us here and also a bit concerning. Like much of the past month or so, the next month will be a time of great uncertainty. We don't really know what is coming down the pipeline. We need a defense against this plague of uncertainty, just as we need vaccines against viruses. This week's Parsha is called Shemini. For the first time in what seems like months, this is a regular Parsha with no additions or substitutions from the weekly cycle. Shemini means eighth, which refers to the eighth day after a week-long process that constituted the dedication of the tabernacle about 1 year after the Exodus. This was a big deal by any standard, since it represented the culmination of the great project of ensuring God's presence among the Israelites following the catastrophe of the golden calf. As important as this eighth day event was, we are going to bypass it and go to something that comes at the end of the Parsha that seemingly has nothing to do with the tabernacle, the Exodus, or the golden calf. In fact, it seems to come right out of left field, having nothing really to do to anything that we have seen before. It just happens that this unexpected thing is probably the best known feature of Judaism today. It is, of course, the laws of Kashrut, or at least some of them. Everybody knows about keeping kosher, and the word Kashrut is a variation of this common expression. It really means preparation, as it encompasses the entire process of making sure that food is kosher or fit to eat. In modern time, this includes the complicated laws of milk and meat, the various restrictions on certain foods like wine, cheese, and flour, and a whole slew of other details that nobody except quite observant Jews has any inkling of. But it also includes the subject found in our parsha, the famous matter of which animals can or cannot be eaten. Strictly speaking, this matter is really not covered by the umbrella term kashrut at all. Like we just stated, that term has to do with food preparation and includes things like how to slaughter, salt, or cook the animal, to say nothing of all the rest. The subject of which animals can be eaten to begin with really comes under different terms. In fact, the word kosher or any variation is never mentioned in the long list of kosher animals that appear in this parsha. What is found repeatedly is the words tameh and tahor, which mean roughly impure or pure, respectively. But these translations really don't do justice to the original Hebrew words, since they give the impression of being contaminated or uncontaminated by some unclear substance. As far as anyone knows, there is nothing in impure animals that makes them contaminated, nor is there any quality of pure animals that makes them uncontaminated. So what is it that defines these two categories? Probably the best known definition, and one that fits into many of the individual cases, is that the impure animals are carnivores, while the pure animals aren't. However, when it comes to the birds and the fish, this definition falls flat on its face. The defining feature of fish is that they must have fins and scales, while birds don't seem to have any defining feature at all, other than that some are pure and others are impure. Certain suggestions have been made through the centuries to make sense of the system, but there's really nothing conclusive that anyone can say other than to follow the list found in the Torah. There are also, somewhat surprisingly, pure and impure insects. This possibly puts to rest the idea that pure animals are somehow not disgusting, whatever that may mean. It is hard to imagine a 21st century observant Jew really wanting to dive into a bowl of baked grasshoppers. But strictly speaking, they should have no problem finding them at the nearest kosher restaurant. All in all, it is not an easy system to make heads or tails out of, so we're probably better off leaving it just the way it is. Just the way the Torah states, regardless of whether we really want to eat these animals or not. However, there is more to be said on this subject, and it comes at the very end of this long list. Among the closing verses of the Parsha, we find a kind of summary of the entire corpus of laws. And I quote, "For I am God your Lord, and you must make yourselves holy and remain holy. For I am holy. For I, Hashem, brought you up from the land of Egypt to be for you a God, and you shall be holy, since I am holy." There sure is a lot of holiness in these short verses. In fact, the word comes up in one form or another no less than 5 times. It seems a little overdone, this repetition of this idea. We should be holy since God is holy, and somehow not eating the wrong things makes us holy. What does it all mean? How does a diet make someone holy? For that matter, what is holiness to begin with? It is this last question that we will attempt to deal with first. Though it must be stated at the outset that this word is pretty tough to pin down with or without the Torah. The Torah really doesn't give any clear idea of what holiness actually is. It seems to simply take it for granted that we know what the word means, and we should act accordingly. The fact that the word comes up so often in one form or another in the Torah makes things even more confusing. The prohibition of consuming blood from an animal, one of the many laws of Kashrut, is a matter of holiness. So are the various prohibitions of incest and adultery. Then again, there is a long list of apparently unconnected commandments a few parshas down the road in Leviticus that are also somehow connected to holiness. Matters concerning idolatry and necromancy are also related to it. There doesn't seem to be any common thread between all these matters with which we can discover a definition of this perplexing term. About 100 years ago, a German author named Rudolf Otto wrote a book in German that has been translated into English as The Idea of the Holy. In this rather eye-opening book, he defines the term as anything dealing with what he calls, quote, numinous, a vague word that seems to mean something on the order of spiritual or spooky or something along those lines. The problem with this is that these words are equally vague. Translating a vague word like holiness into an even more vague word like numinous isn't all that helpful, even if we explain numinous as spiritual. What is spiritual? Holy seems to be one of those strange terms that we all have some idea of what it means until we are asked to explain what it really is. Why don't we simply go back to our original verses in this week's Parsha and see if we can get anywhere on this question. We should be holy since God is holy. Right there we have something that is so obvious that it is easy to overlook. God is holy. Perhaps that is the key that we are looking for. God is holy. Holy is godly. What could be simpler? But what is godly? This is a tough question, but it may have an accessible answer. God, according to the Torah and Judaism, is both immersed in the world and totally distinct from the world. In fact, this very idea of distinction may be the defining feature of God, and by extension of holiness. Distinct does not necessarily mean distinguished as in one's social status, though it could include that. Distinct means separate from the mundane and the everyday. God, in whatever form or image taken in people's minds, almost invariably indicates something that is beyond the regular world, supernatural, all-powerful, eternal, perfect. These qualities are certainly distinct from the everyday world of death, imperfection, and problematic. The godly is whatever is distinct from the imperfect world. It may seem a bit imaginary at times, but it is always there in some corner of the mind. That frequently hidden aspect of life is what we call God. In it resides all notions of ultimate purpose, of transcendent goodness, of the true meaning of life. It is in those sorts of things that God can be found, since they are truly holy. But the Torah states that we can also be holy, that we must become holy. How are we to do this? It is by emulating, as best we can, those qualities of God. Perhaps this makes sense with certain sexual prohibitions or laws about idolatry or necromancy. But what about eating? What has that to do with the holiness of God? This is not an easy question to answer. Perhaps The best answer is that there is some form of distinction in abstaining from certain foods. It may not seem like the most important way to be distinct, but we have to grab for any method we can in this difficult and elusive concept. To be distinct is not to take part in something that we could very easily take part in. If that means not eating certain animals just because the Torah states that we shouldn't, well, who are we to complain? Distinction is not easy. If it comes through food, then it comes through food. The important thing is to use the restrictions not as a way to feel better than others, but as a means of achieving distinction. Distinction is the path to God. Food restrictions are a way of achieving this through one of the most mundane and everyday aspects of life. We can be distinct, to be godly, even while doing what every living thing on the planet does. This last point is quite important. Holiness, according to Judaism, is not achieved through isolating oneself from the world by living alone on top of a mountain. That may be a path to holiness, but is not the only one. Nor is the addition of abstentions a necessary path to holiness. The all-encompassing path is found in attempting to find within the world and within ourselves those features that enable us to find God. A rock is not just a rock if it has godliness within it. It is holy. A blade of grass is not just a blade of grass if God's essence gives it life. It is holy. A time, a place, an event, they are not the same once we realize that they have been infused with godliness. They are holy. A person who strives to inculcate within their very being godliness is not the same person any longer. That person is holy. It is the godliness within anything that makes it distinct and no longer the same old mundane humdrum thing. It is holy. Shabbat shalom.